You were promised continuity. A teacher would die, and the teaching would live, as if wisdom were a flame passed from wick to wick without smoke, without ash, without anyone coughing. Instead, you got a vigil turned stockroom. Keys, deeds, passwords, donor lists, passwords again, inboxes that bite, a YouTube archive whose monetization is a sacrament, no scripture named, the teacher's smile, your proof that love was possible, hangs on a wall like the sun. Meanwhile, in the hallway, adults whisper over bylaws stay. By the end of this, I will ask you to choose between the film Serenity that sold you safety and the unphotogenic choreography that keeps a house from eating its most obedient children. The question is not who inherits the chair. The question is who inherits the consequences of a sentence spoken by someone who can no longer pay for it when it breaks. Charisma was always a loan. We mistook it for equity. The loan is the mood that a body radiates when it is both convinced and convincing. The terms are the costs it shields you from seeing. When the body leaves, the loan comes due. A room that leaned on cadence will now lean on captions. A lineage that leaned on aura will now lean on archives. A board that leaned on hush will now lean on compassion, as a non-disclosure clause he would have wanted becomes the theology of convenience, and everyone hears the sentence that makes their hunger purr. In this fog, the heir most likely to win is the one most compatible with the camera's idea of virtue, gentle voice, steady frame, sorrow that photographs as poise. The camera does not inherit vows, it inherits audiences. Transmission once meant a human placing a bet on your future and tying their name to the costs. Succession now means a parliament of incentives passing laws about a person who cannot veto, the smile cannot vote, the creditors can. This is the first rudeness of our era. Assets outlive bodies, and assets want custodians who will not disturb their sleep. The second rudeness is older. Projection outlives vows, and projection wants a face to wear. So we argue about faces while payroll waits. We canonize anecdotes while the lease expires on Thursday. We post the last photo, moist-eyed. We do not post the calendar where a conflict of interest needs to be named before it turns into a lawsuit with incense. Who inherits a smile? Everyone who needs the smile to keep them from facing the dull nouns that succession drags into daylight. Trustee, trademark, tenure, title, tenure again, title again, and the most sacrilegious noun of all, replacement. Replacement does not mean equality. It means responsibility for harm that will be done by words spoken in a dead person's name. If your lineage cannot say, this is the person who will be sued without flinching, your lineage is not a refuge. It is a theme. I am not here to bury your teacher. I am here to bury the flattery that calls the Afterglow a governance plan. If the Dharma is to survive charisma's funeral, it will have to admit what the camera cannot film. Signatures, disagreements, the slow-moving weather of adults who refuse to let a smile become destiny. You came for comfort. I will hand you the last kindness, the living, oh, the dead, to stop using their light to avoid our paperwork. Charisma is a solvent. It dissolves formalities while it lives. In its absence, residue appears. The documents charisma made unnecessary, the resentments it beautified, the shortcuts it justified. The estate attorney calls them property. Devotees call them grace. The market knows what they are: attention with title, accounts, lists, rights, likeness, a pipeline of alms, rebadged as donations and friends of the center. We treat charisma's leftovers like relics. The relic economy has rules. Scarcity multiplies value, provenance manufactures it, and hagiography supplies the frictionless story that keeps awkward questions from showing up in the comments. Charisma's primary delusion is temporal. It persuades rooms that they are now forever. Rituals loosen, bylaws soften, the ledger lives in someone's head, passwords live in someone's pocket. The day after the funeral, time returns like a creditor. The we that once felt inevitable is revealed to be a union of private commitments that now must be turned into public ones or die. And because the public is less romantic, the language that saved us, a voice that could speak like weather, hardens into policy. We experience this as betrayal. We are wrong. It is puberty. A lineage that matures after the death of its weather will be accused of selling out precisely when it begins to tell the truth about money and power. Accusers will be sincere. They will also be beneficiaries of the climate the old weather sustained, a regime where charisma carried the costs that policy must now distribute. Watch, then, for a familiar weapon, the will of the teacher, reconstructed by those whose proximity to his breath furnishes authority by osmosis. He told me privately, becomes a fiduciary instrument without witnesses. The dead are conscripted. So are the living who cannot contradict without appearing ungrateful to a face they too loved. Meanwhile, donors study the moment as predators study a waterhole. Continuity is their favorite word. Access is the price they pay for naming who counts as continuing. The heir who can perform gratitude without disrupting inflows will be called faithful. The heir who insists that gratitude be structured, rotation, transparency, shared signatures will be called political. The former inherits a smile, the latter tries to inherit risk. Only one of them actually builds a house. To inherit aura without inheriting its debts is to counterfeit. But aura is easier to pass down than responsibility, because aura is a file format and responsibility is a fight the camera can transfer one. Only rooms can transfer the other. If your succession plan is an upload, you have not planned for succession, you have planned for marketing. Every living teacher produces two archives: the archive of felt events, late night mercies, unscripted corrections, glances that unbound a decade, and the archive of documents, founding papers, leases, tax statuses, bylaw revisions, non-disparagement clauses. The dream tells you the first is the real Dharma and the second is a necessary evil. The adult tells you the second is the only reason the first can continue without cannibalizing future children. Succession is where the split becomes a wound. Disciples demand deliverance of a mood. The law demands the names of those who will be liable when the mood misfires. In most houses, the dream wins the eulogy and the document wins the morning after. The night before, we recount miracles. The morning after, someone discovers that the miracle's legal owner is a person who never took vows but did sign checks someone's nephew runs the web store, a domain is registered to a private Gmail, and the server farm bills the old abbot's credit card. Holiness, meet the help desk. What you call desecration is simply the unmasking of ownership. Ownership is an acid test. It reveals whether what we built was a refuge or a brand. The brand has successors. The refuge has stewards. A successor reproduces aesthetics and tone. A steward reproduces conditions, the boring distributable capacities that allow fallible people to tell the truth without being destroyed by it. The successor rehearses, the steward redistributes. The successor curates, quotes, the steward spreads keys. The successor inherits a smile. The steward inherits complaints. If your heirs cannot read a balance sheet, they cannot read a room. If they cannot be removed by a vote, they are not heirs, they are owners. We like to say lineage protects the teaching. Sometimes it does. Sometimes lineage protects a story from correction. The infallibility that clung to a body now clings to a logo, and the easiest way to sanctify the logo is to wear the face of the dead and speak in their rhythm. Ventriloquism becomes a sacrament. The heresy that saves lives is paperwork, independent boards, sunset clauses on offices, conflict of interest policies with teeth. Yes, I know you came for incense. Incense is a cost center. If we will not read the cost centers aloud, we will use a smile as a shield for what the living do not want to name. Who signs for the miracle? No one. That is why we require signatures for everything else. The miracle is what costs nothing and changes everything. The infrastructure is what costs everything and changes nothing without hands. Succession is the art of keeping the miracle innocent by making the infrastructure honest. In houses that fail, miracles inherit expectations and infrastructure inherits rot. In houses that endure, expectations inherit limits and infrastructure inherits witnesses. When a teacher dies, two economies erupt: relics and rumors. Relics are the tangible proxies for proximity. Rumors are the intangible proxies for authority. Both traffic in the same commodity. Access to the teacher's time retroactively to their supposed preferences, to their imagined endorsements. The smile becomes a portable relic. The whisper becomes a portable rumor. Together they colonize the present, forcing the living to bow to a past that can no longer speak except through those who claim to speak for it. In this climate, grief becomes a governance vacuum. Affection outvotes procedure, tears outbid minutes. The most bereaved becomes de facto chair. The camera loves this because it can film it. The law hates this because it cannot enforce it. Elder students step forward with the aura of firstness. Last caretakers step forward with the aura of last touch. The quiet, competent step forward with the aura of solvency. Each carries a truth. None carries enough. Without a covenant drafted before the body cooled, we will litigate intimacy. Litigation of intimacy ruins both intimacy and law. It rewards the most theatrical pain and the most patient predator. Rumor also manufactures doctrine after the fact. He softened at the end, says the faction that wants policy softened. He was stricter than ever, says the faction that wants a purge. He wanted unity, says the faction that wants their unity recognized as unity. Posthumous ventriloquism is not an aberration. It is an evolutionary strategy for institutions that never separated testimony from governance. Where the two blur, nostalgia sets policy. Nostalgia is governance by flattery of the dead. The dead do not pay for the payroll Mrs. Nostalgia creates. Relics are trickier because they are innocent. A robe, a bowl, a cushion, material kindnesses that steady the wounded. But even innocence can be drafted into war. The bowl rotates to the disciple who promises harmony. The robe drapes the one who can fundraise. The cushion goes to the one Twitter calls voice of the lineage. Heirlooms turn into endorsements. Endorsements turn into appointments. Appointments turn into silencing when the endorsed feel threatened by memory that does not fit their myth. The cure is not disenchantment, it is cataloging to make the relics public, the rumors accountable, the appointments reversible. The narrative body, the teacher, as a story that survives the teacher as a body, will inherit 1,000 mouths. You will be tempted to choose the mouth that hurts you least. Choose instead the mouth that lets itself be contradicted by records, even when those records cut its romance. If a mouth claims the right to decide because it can weep on cue, it may be grieving. It may also be auditioning for the throne left behind by a smile. Succession devolves into a map of proximities. First to arrive, last to leave, closest in daily logistics, nearest in ritual function, boldest in public. Each proximity is a claim. Each claim is a wound for others or for itself. The first in disciple carries founding fire and founding blindness. They remember a teacher poor and a house small, and their piety toward struggle becomes policy against growth. The last out caretaker carries physician's intimacy and physician's resentment. They kept the body alive at the end and now confuse guardianship of a failing organism with governance of a living one. The ritual attendant carries liturgical legitimacy and is tone deaf to finance. The public apostle carries battle scars from the marketplace and sees governance as PR. These are not flaws, they are angles. Angles, when unexamined, become crowns. Into this geometry walk the invisible, the people who kept the databases clean, the apartments habitable, the visas stamped, the donors thanked without being seduced. They smell politics earlier than the poets because politics smells like work. They know which successor will answer emails and which will answer omens. They know the payroll date and the leak under the stairs. Their vote counts least because governance by visibility mistakes witness for worth, succession rewards photogenic pain, and penalizes boring competence until the boring competence leaves and the photogenic pain hires a COO who reads the bylaws with a lawyer's mouth. Proximity also breeds proprietary tenderness, the kind that resents any successor who did not pay the same price for entrance. I fetched his tea. I washed his feet. I witnessed his terror. These are sacraments. They are also receipts that cannot be reimbursed. We misapply them as vetting criteria and end up selecting for martyrdom as if endurance under a saint were a predictor of stewardship under a budget. It isn't. The person who can sit still for a dying man may not be the person who can say no to a living donor. Then there are the children of the teacher, biological, metaphorical, institutional. Blood has a smell money recognizes. Boards panic and reach for family as if grief could be outsourced to genetics. Sometimes it works. Kinship domesticated by policy can be a mercy. Often it does not. Inheritance becomes feudal and the smile is privatized. The oldest heresy returns. ownership of the sacred by a few. The remedy is as old: disperse the power to those who will lose reputation to keep rooms safe, not gain it by curating the memory of the beloved. Proximity is not authority, proximity is evidence. It must be weighed against records, not paraded as redemption. The house that cannot tell this difference will turn its history into royalty and its future into tenure without review. Money is not neutral in succession. It is constitutive. Temples outlive teachers because land outlives lungs. Whoever controls a title deed controls doctrine via calendars, access, microphone assignments, and the quiet veto of "not at this venue." Add to this the digital estate, the channels, the mailing lists, the lecture footage, the trademarks, and you arrive at a 21st century priesthood of platform holders. In a dispute about who inherits the smile, platform holders will sound like peacemakers while practicing embargo, deny stream keys, throttle access to archives, pause the newsletter until a unity statement reads like a non-compete. Donors behave like central banks of affection. In the absence of an embodied sovereign, they stabilize by selecting a face. Stabilization is not free. It nudges policy toward the donor's preference, which often, despite language of humility, is predictability. Predictability requires the suppression of wild truth at exactly those moments when wild truth would save the house. A successor allergic to polite lies will frighten stabilizers. A successor adept at polite lies will be praised as pastoral. The market chooses the latter until the scandals ripen and the house learns to love teeth. Intellectual property completes the cage. A name becomes a trademark, a phrase becomes a license, an image becomes a weapon against internal dissent. Take that down or face the lawyers who now speak for compassion. The saint's smile becomes a cease and desist letterhead. You will tell me this protects teachings from dilution. Sometimes it does. It also protects regimes from correction. If your succession plan cannot imagine criticism wearing the old logo, your succession plan is a hush clause with incense. Real estate brings us to the bluntest truth. Whoever can make payroll and mortgage will inherit policy, even if they never inherited courage. Courage is not a budget line. It is the willingness to say, "We were wrong," when the correction shrinks revenue. If the only people authorized to speak cannot afford for revenue to dip, you have built a hostage situation with prayer flags. Release yourself by putting doctrine into the custody of those who can survive a bad quarter, because their legitimacy is civic, not commercial. Without this, the Saffron city-state survives its profit by becoming a mall with chanting. Security guards memorize mantras. The escalator is very clean. The smile beams from a light box above the register. Shoppers feel holy. The receipts are crisp. Doctrine becomes a warranty program. Succession complete. The algorithm pretends to be democratic. It is not a vote. It is a market that lets attention impersonate consent. After a teacher dies, the channel becomes a plebiscite with no citizens, only users. The comments read like hymns to the true heir, and you are tempted to confuse fluency with mandate. You count hearts and imagine hands. But a sangha is not a stream. A sangha has quorum, minutes, and people who look bored because boring is how rooms do repair. Streams have none of this. Streams have vibes measured in click-through. Parasocial intimacy selects for heirs who can metabolize grief into content. Well-lit tears, tasteful pauses, voiceovers that sound like absolutions. The ability to hold a timeline together during mourning is not the ability to hold a room together during conflict, but the platform will weight the former as success and inflict the latter as scandal. Thus, the gentle coup. A charismatic caretaker becomes the face because audience retention rose while meals were being brought to the dying. The caretaking was holy. The coronation is optional. The platform omits this difference. Audience governance also rewrites doctrine to fit the feed's metabolism. Unity becomes no public disagreement. Transparency becomes behind the scenes content. Accountability becomes a video apology with ambient music. These are counterfeits that calm the edge of panic and keep the store open. The room where decisions cost the deciders something real becomes a backdrop for well lit sincerity. Sincerity is cheaper than correction. We buy it in bulk. The worst seduction is compassion at scale. Grandchildren of the teacher plead for tenderness toward everyone. Yes, tenderness without teeth becomes the regime's perfume. The algorithm loves perfume. Teeth do not index well. A dissenter with receipts will be scolded for tone, while an heir with tone will be lauded for healing the community. Healing is measured by silence. Safety is measured by structures. Silence returns quickly when dissenters are tired. Structures return slowly and only when cowards lose. If your house starts confusing, trending with trust, prepare for devotion to be harvested by strangers with dashboards. They will elevate voices. Elevation turns heirs into influencers who owe their throne not to vows, but to virality. Influence is not a lineage, it is a lease. We have circled the room and found the hinge. Succession is not about who wears the robe. It is about who inherits risk. Risk of being sued, risk of being disliked for telling the truth, risk of losing donors for keeping victims safe, risk of letting holy stories shrivel under daylight. If your plan names faces but not risks, you have nominated models, not stewards. The smile will crown them. The house will eat them. The vulnerable will pay. You wanted a provocation. Here is the only one worth hearing at a funeral. If the saint's light cannot survive minutes, it was never the saint's light. It was stagecraft, subsidized by a body that took the blows off camera. The adult thing is boring. Constitutions, rotations, audits, removable offices, end dates, trustees who publish their conflicts and lose gracefully when outvoted. The child in us finds this sacrilegious. He is wrong. This is how love grows molars. By the time you ask, who inherits a smile? It is late. Ask it anyway. Then ask the heretical follow-up. Who inherits the complaint box? Who inherits the power to ban the beloved when the beloved is dangerous? Who inherits the obligation to say no to the donor who wants keys with their check? Who inherits the right to contradict the dead with the living truth that saves lives now? Those are the heirs to the teaching. The rest are keepers of a museum where grief is curated into perfume. I am not against reverence. I am against reverence that refuses nouns. The nouns of succession are not poetry. Deed, trust, policy, board, vote, recall, restitution. If your house cannot say them aloud under the smile, take the smile down. It has become an idol that sells tickets to a show where no one admits who cleans the floor after the curtain. The Dharma deserves better than theater. It deserves rooms that can lose illusions and keep people. If your lineage fits inside a smile, it isn't lineage, it's lighting. I'm Silent Flame. Name the trustees of risk or stop calling it Dharma.